I hope you guys are really enjoying the journalism section of this course and that you really have been inspired by Professor Foley's words. He's one of my best friends and definitely one of the professors who got me really into teaching and practicing journalism. I want to talk to you about one of my favorite subjects, though, the evolution of storytelling and how alternative forms of storytelling are really flourishing today. If you think about it, storytelling started 17,000 BC when we did our first cave paintings. It's evolved from the Rosetta Stone to Egyptian hieroglyphics to printing presses, all the way to the modern newspaper that we know today. And now, with the infusion of the internet and really digital technology, storytelling is everything from a tweet to an animated GIF to really any piece of content or media that you share with someone else. Like we said in the last module of the course, the first question is always to ask yourself who your audience is. But right after that, along with your angle and everything, is really how are you going to tell this story? It's quite difficult nowadays. We have so many different mediums, but ultimately we need to think about the perspective. You know, you can look at the same photo of Central Park two completely different ways. You can look at it the way we've all seen it, or you can stare at it from straight down above. It tells a totally different story. You might think one's filled, one's empty. You might think entirely differently about how a story is told just by the angle in which a photo is presented. This is what storytelling is all about. It's about bringing your audience a new perspective on something. We all hear over and over and over again about football stats or the results of an election or these events, these things that happen. But what journalism does is it allows us to bring a different perspective and explain a very complex thing to our audiences. So an example of this might be, pulling off the top of my head, an example might be a recent election that just happened. And you might have a congressman who just got elected and you say, okay, well, here are these election results. Great. But the perspective might be, what if we overlay these election results on top of a map that has the socioeconomic status of every county? And what if we lay that on top of a map that has pinpoints of where all the major donors were? Now we're starting to bring a new perspective of how someone actually got elected or who they're actually representing. And we're not really changing any facts. We're not swaying a reader one way or another. We're presenting them with information for them to make a decision based on a perspective. You know, a great exercise I like to do is take a newspaper, take any sort of publication, then take a Sharpie and start circling all the things that aren't needed. And the reason for this is to start realizing that as technology is changing, we need to start simpling our design to get to the essence of storytelling. What's the most important factor? Is it the photograph? Is it the headline? Is it the lead? What's the best way we can get our readers to engage with our content? We see wonderfully well-designed websites. One of my favorites is Planet Money Makes a T-shirt that NPR did, which that link will be on this section. It's a phenomenal walkthrough of each of the steps that it takes to actually make a T-shirt. So the question is, what's storytelling today? Storytelling today is new narratives. It's new narratives, again, from a new perspective, but it's almost where you can take different things like crowdsourcing content and curating it and telling a better story through that. No longer are we as journalists the sole gatekeepers of news. Anybody can find out any piece of information that they want through the internet. And if we try and stop them, or if we try and say, no, you have to come through us, audiences are going to find a better way. This happens all the time with paywalls. People wonder, well, no one wants to pay for news. Well, that's true. No one wants to pay for basic common knowledge. I shouldn't have to pay to find out who won the football game last week. But if I want that in-depth analysis or if I want that inside story, I'm going to start to value that content a lot more. It's why people still subscribe to Sports Illustrated, even though we get the scores of the game instantaneously on our phone. We have to do this really quickly, though. We have to adapt with the times. We have to recognize what our audiences are interested in, and really we have to predict what our audiences might be interested in after that. It's very, very difficult. But our first step is really to make me care. Can you come up with an angle, a story, a way that someone can say, all right, this isn't just an event. I really care about this person. A lot of times this is done through characters. I love using Pixar examples. You know, who really cares about a bunch of toys? But you look at Toy Story and you see these characters that have been carefully developed over decades now, and you say, wow, I really care about the feelings and the emotion. Bring that same sort of again, fictional creativity into your non-fictional journalism. It doesn't mean you have to make up facts. It doesn't mean you have to bend the ethical rules. But write your stories and present your stories in a way in which the audience starts to feel a character. So if a head football coach might have gotten fired, you could start your lead with Coach Will Muschamp walked off the field in Tallahassee, Florida, into the locker room to give his last press conference. Simple narrative, okay, it happened. Or you could describe what was the look on his face. What was the look on his child's face? Was his wife misty-eyed? Was her makeup starting to run a little bit? Start to paint a picture of a family walking off the field, unified together in this adverse time, or overcoming this big issue. Your audience is going to start to feel a little bit more. They're going to start to want to know what's next. So as we're starting to build these stories, we have to recognize what doesn't work. A lot of times journalists will get a story and get it out there and say, okay, great, I got my story, put it to press, back when we really had presses, or publish it online, or tweet it out, or whichever way you'd like to publish. We very rarely measure the success of our stories, and not just clicks and hits, but how much time people spent reading it, or, God forbid, going out and asking someone what they thought of the story. That's very important. Think of a story as almost your product that you're testing. And is it going to work well? A lot of times this starts with a good design. And you should design your story based on your audience, and also design your story based on the content in which you're trying to tell. So if your audience is getting that story through Twitter, clearly you're going to design that lead a little bit different than if your audience was opening up a magazine, or if your audience was on a specific website that they knew was a long-form storytelling. The good design, though, is essential. It goes back to taking those red Sharpies and starting to cross out all of the things you don't need to tell a story. And that goes really into our activity for this week, which is I want you guys to take a news content, an article, and whether that can be photo, video, a newspaper, a magazine, something. I want you to take a red pen. And if it's online, that's awesome. Take a screenshot and go into Photoshop or Microsoft Paint and do a digital red pen. I love that. But start crossing out the things that aren't needed. Maybe it's the barcode at the bottom of a magazine. It's not needed in today's day and age. Maybe it's the cover of a magazine with all those headlines on it. Well, why do we need all those headlines? Well, we needed those headlines to grab readers' attention from a newsstand. But our readers aren't really getting their news from a newsstand anymore. Maybe there's a better way we can tell those stories. So how do we tell stories tomorrow? We prepare. We prepare really well. We get to know our audiences. We get to know these new technologies. But we have to prepare to try new things to fail. If you don't try telling a story entirely through the perspective of a pizza box, or entirely through animated GIFs, or through these crazy ideas, how are you ever going to find out the right solution to tell a story? You should always, always be encouraged to fail. That doesn't mean get a fact error, or that doesn't mean not proofread or make things up. That means present the story in a light that it might not work. And that's okay, because we can measure that and move on. A lot of what I like to teach here is kind of your going out and gathering your stories. What kind of tools do you need? What should be in your bag? And a lot of people ask, what camera should I buy, or what lens should I get, or what video camera? And I always say, most of the time, it can be your iPhone is one of the best storytelling tools. But on top of that, it's the equipment that you're most comfortable with. I'm most comfortable with a DSLR camera that I can switch back and forth from still to video. It's what I'm recording on right now. I'm most comfortable with higher end equipment because that's what I've been doing. I'm a photojournalist. But someone else might be most comfortable with an iPhone. Okay, put an iPhone on a tripod, get a little small external mic, and you can actually tell a pretty good visual story. So what you want to pack in your bag is really the tools you're most comfortable with, because you're always going to have to adapt for a new situation, and that's key. And new technologies like the iPhone 6 and the new iWatch, you could almost set a camera up and from your watch see what it looks like and hit go. The technology is always going to be amazing and getting smaller and changing and being able to broadcast even faster. That's amazing. What used to take a CNN truck filled with equipment can now really be your iPhone and a laptop, or a digital camera and a laptop, and pretty soon everything through just your phone. If anybody tells you that's not professional, great. Well, they're probably living in an older time. As long as you're getting your story across, if you're cohesively telling a story, if you have good audio, if it's simple video, if your audience can focus on what's going on, It doesn't matter what tool you use. And that's the most exciting part about this new age of journalism, is we have the ability for everybody to be storytellers. And that's great. We should take all of that curated content, we should vet it and make sure it's still correct, but we should definitely use that to our advantage. A great example of this is a company called Storyful. Storyful basically verifies social media content and licenses it and sells it to news agencies. It's a new type of digital newsroom. And they just released kind of their 10 commandments, but I plucked a few of them that I thought was really worth sharing with you guys today. And the first is there's always going to be someone closer to the story. You should always remember that as a journalist. So it's okay to start to rely on other people's content. You should also never assume that content is correct. You should always check that content, making sure that it's accurate and that it's not made up, because a lot of this stuff you'll see online, Hurricane Sandy that was going around Twitter, as we all remember, was made up. The third is an interesting one. It might come from our public relations world, and that's set the agenda. If you're a news organization or you're a journalist, you shouldn't just be republishing what everybody else is doing. Don't write the same story over and over again. Work with your colleagues or even individually say, here's what I'm going to focus on. I'm going to set my own agenda for this evening. On top of that, don't confuse quality and quantity. Having a lot of content is great, but having a few pieces of really great content is so much better. You will be much more respected as a legitimate news organization. And as you guys built your Twitter in the last module of the course, think about how you can tweet consistently, how you can start to use that to build your brand as a storyteller, or as an advertising expert, or as a public relations expert, or as a visual storyteller expert in telecommunications. Speed matters, but substance matters much more. So remember, being the first is great, but as Professor Foley said, no one remembers the first. They always remember who got it wrong. And lastly, context is king. When you tweet something out, or as you go through Roy Peter Clark's book on how to write short, we're always doing short snippets. And a lot of times that context is really important. Try to put yourself in the audience's shoes to realize, how are they getting this information? If I just tweet, such and such did this, could it be misconstrued in a different way because it was just on Twitter? Or maybe it just got placed right below another tweet that we have no control over. So always try to understand what your context is doing in this case. Remember that every piece of content you design in any discipline should be designed with an intent. If it's not designed with an intent, people are going to look over it. We're filled with so much noise right now, with so many tweets that nobody cares about, with so many TV ads that nobody cares about, with 24-hour cable news that we think probably was just put on repeat by accident in some master control room. Having that quality design and really understanding your audiences is how you can engage with your audiences and effectively tell a story. Whether that's in journalism world where you're trying to inform an audience, or whether that's in advertising where you're trying to get them to do something, or public relations where you're trying to alter what people think about a company, how to get them to agree with you or disagree with you. This is all really important. And it goes back to deciding, what do you want to do? Not really who you want to work for, but what types of stories do you want to share with the world? And that is the start of your career. I really hope you guys are enjoying the class so far. Especially journalism is my passion, it's my background. But I think that whichever field you choose, the heart of storytelling will always be fundamental to being successful in it. And I think these what were just fundamental storytelling and journalism rules are really applicable across the platform. And if any journalist tells you there's nothing they can learn from public relations or advertising, or any of those professions say there's nothing they can learn from journalism, they're wrong. We have to understand all of these different ways of storytelling to be the best at what we can in our respective field. You guys have a great week. We have a quiz coming up. Don't forget about that. We have got public relations up next in the module. I'm excited to share with you some of our amazing things we're doing here at the college and some of the new fields that are emerging out of that. And have a wonderful day.